What if the most famous face in the world had nothing behind it? What if the man the whole planet trusted with their entertainment, their admiration, their worship, was wearing something that only looked like a face? What if one interview, one room, one handshake changed everything a man thought he knew about what walks among us? I sat across from Tom Cruise. I asked the questions nobody was supposed to ask. And what I found underneath the most carefully constructed smile in Hollywood history didn't have a name, didn't have an explanation, didn't have anything behind the eyes that I could recognize as living. What happened in that room will never leave me. And after I tell you what I saw, it won't leave you either. Some things are better left unseen. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I am not the kind of man who scares easily. I never have been. I grew up in a household where fear was a luxury nobody could afford. Single mother, 3 kids, a neighborhood where you learned early that the world didn't slow down for your anxiety. You either moved through it or it moved through you. I chose to move. That upbringing built something in me that I carried into every room I ever walked into professionally. A stillness, a refusal to flinch. My mother used to say I came out of the womb already unimpressed with everything. She wasn't wrong. I became a journalist because I believed in one thing: the truth doesn't hide. People hide it. Institutions bury it. Publicists sand its edges down until it's smooth enough to hand to the public without anyone getting cut. But the truth itself is always there, sitting right underneath the surface, waiting for someone stubborn enough to pull it out. I started in local crime reporting, police scanners and cold coffee and editors who killed your best stories because somebody's cousin owned an ad in the paper. I covered murders that never made national news because the victims didn't fit a profile anyone cared about. Corruption buried inside non-disclosure agreements thick as phone books. I once covered a cult leader operating out of a converted warehouse in the industrial district. 43 followers convinced he could communicate with the dead. That story ran in 3 publications, got picked up internationally. Also got my car window smashed twice and my apartment broken into once. Nothing taken, just a message. I kept writing anyway. By the time the interview with Tom Cruise landed on my desk, I had been doing this for 7 years. I had sat across from men who ordered violence and smiled doing it. I had developed what my editor called a radar, the ability to read the space between what someone says and what their body is actually doing while they say it. I was good at it. I need you to understand that before I go any further, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like the account of a man who lost his grip on reality inside a single afternoon. I walked into that room as the most clear-eyed, grounded, unshakable version of myself I had ever been. I walked out as something else entirely. The way I got that interview was not normal. Scientology had a serious problem. The FBI investigations were becoming impossible to ignore. Former members were speaking publicly. Human trafficking allegations were bleeding into mainstream press. Their carefully constructed image was fracturing in real time. So they did what every institution does when its public image starts hemorrhaging. They pivoted. They launched what they called the Open Door Initiative, a public transparency campaign giving independent journalists direct access to key figures. One exclusive sit-down with Tom Cruise, 60 minutes, one journalist, selected through public submission. They called it the open chair, framed as accountability. What they actually wanted was someone credible enough to legitimize the interview and controllable enough to never leave their lane. I submitted anyway, not because I thought I would win, because the submission itself was already a story. 3 weeks later, I got the call. I had won. My editor went quiet when I told him. Then he said, and I remember this word for word, They read your work and they still picked you? They know exactly what you've written about organizations like theirs. They didn't choose you because they think you'll go easy. They chose you for another reason. Find out what that reason is before you walk into that room. I told him he was being paranoid. I was wrong about that. I brought Devin Reyes with me, my cameraman. 7 years we had worked together. He was the kind of man who made every room feel manageable just by being in it. Steady, quiet, professional. He had a way of disappearing behind the camera that made subjects forget he existed at all. People trusted Devin without knowing why. He had one of those faces that made you feel like whatever room you were standing in was going to be okay. I had never once seen him uncomfortable on a job. We drove to the location together. And I remember this clearly because I've gone back to it every single day since. About 10 minutes before we arrived, Devin went quiet. Not his normal quiet. Something different. The warmth that was always just there about him, that steadiness, that presence, it just disappeared, like a light switching off behind his eyes. I asked him if he was all right. He said yes, but he didn't look at me when he said it. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong about that too. The address they sent us wasn't a studio. I had assumed it would be. A controlled environment, neutral lighting, a production team with earpieces, and someone whose entire job was to make sure nothing unexpected happened. That's how these things work at his level. That's how they stay clean. Instead, the GPS took us off the main road and down a private stretch that didn't appear on the satellite image I had pulled the night before. The trees on either side were old, tall enough that they killed the afternoon light almost completely. Devin didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just watched the road narrow. The estate appeared slowly. That was the first thing that unsettled me. Not that it appeared, but how it appeared. Most large properties announce themselves. Gates, signage, a wall you see from a distance. This one seemed to materialize out of the tree line like it had always been there and simply decided to let us see it. The building itself was enormous. Pale stone, immaculate grounds. The kind of place that has been maintained so precisely for so long that it no longer feels like anyone lives inside it. It felt less like a home and more like something that had learned to imitate one. A man in a gray suit met us at the entrance, no name given. He checked our credentials without making eye contact, spoke into a radio in a voice too low to catch, and gestured for us to follow. The inside of the building was cold, not the cold of air conditioning. Something underneath that. The kind of cold that doesn't come from a temperature. It comes from a space that has absorbed too much silence over too many years. Devin set up the equipment in the designated interview room. I watched him work. He moved the same way he always moved. Efficient, precise. But there was something mechanical about it now. Something that hadn't been there before. He hadn't spoken since we left the car. The room itself was deliberately unremarkable. 2 chairs, soft lighting angled to flatter, a small table with 2 glasses of water neither of us touched. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph positioned directly behind where the subject would sit. I walked over to look at it. It was Tom Cruise, not a film still, not a press photograph, a candid shot taken from a distance. He was standing alone in an open field looking at something outside the frame. The angle was strange, slightly too high, as if whoever took it was above him without his knowledge. His posture was rigid. His face was turned just enough that you couldn't read his expression. I stared at it longer than I should have. I heard the door open behind me, and then the room changed. I don't know how else to describe it. Nothing moved. The lighting didn't shift. There was no sound I could identify. But something in the atmosphere of that room altered the moment he crossed the threshold. The way a barometric pressure drops before a storm without a single visible cloud in the sky. Something in the air tightened. I turned around. He was exactly what you would expect. The smile arrived before anything else. Wide, immediate, practiced to the point where it no longer resembled something that needed a reason to exist. He was immaculate. The posture, the handshake already extended before he had fully crossed the room. The entire entrance choreographed so smoothly that your brain registers it as natural before it has time to question what it's actually watching. I reached out and took his hand, and everything I just described, the smile, the posture, the performance, went completely silent in my mind. Because the hand I was holding didn't feel like a hand. It wasn't cold the way cold normally registers. Cold means absence of heat. This was something different. This was the feeling of touching something that heat had never visited, like pressing your palm against the underside of a stone that hasn't seen sunlight in a century. And beneath the surface, beneath what registered to my eyes as skin, there was nothing. No give, no warmth, no subtle resistance that living tissue carries without ever announcing itself. Just nothing. My face didn't move. I made sure of that. 7 years of sitting across from dangerous men had taught me how to keep my expression exactly where I needed it. But something in my chest dropped. And in the half second before I released his hand, I had one involuntary thought, clear as a voice in an empty room. What am I actually touching right now? He sat down like a man who had never once in his life been uncomfortable. That was the first thing I registered. Not the smile, though the smile was there, immediate and enormous, and so precisely calibrated it could have been measured with instruments. Not the posture, not the handshake still faintly present in the memory of my palm. It was the way he settled into that chair, like the chair had been built for him, like the room had been built for him, like every space he had ever occupied in his entire life had quietly rearranged itself around him before he arrived. I opened with the easy ones. That's standard practice. You warm the subject up. Let them find their rhythm. Let them believe the conversation is going exactly where they expected it to go. I asked about the new project, about the physicality of his stunts, about what keeps him returning to the craft after 4 decades. He answered everything with the fluency of a man who had answered the same questions 10,000 times and found a way to make each answer sound like the first time he'd ever said it. He was extraordinary at it. I mean that without any admiration. I mean it the way you would describe a mechanism that performs its function without error. Every sentence landed, every pause was placed, every laugh arrived exactly when a laugh was supposed to arrive. I watched his face the way I always watch a subject's face, looking for the seams, the micro expressions, the half second where the performance slips and the person underneath surfaces. There were no seams. That was when I felt it shift, not in him, in me. A slow, creeping recalibration of everything I thought I understood about the room I was sitting in. Because I had interviewed controlled people before, politicians, executives, men who had spent decades constructing a public self so airtight that the real one had almost ceased to exist. But there was always something, a flicker, a tell, a moment where the human being inside the performance got tired and let something through. He never got tired. And somewhere around the 15-minute mark, I understood something that turned the temperature of my blood down by several degrees. He wasn't managing this interview. He owned it. Every question I asked, including the ones I had built around the edges of their approved list he had already been to, already mapped, already absorbed and neutralized before I finished the sentence. I wasn't interviewing him. I was being processed, cataloged, filed away in real time by something that had been doing this so long, it no longer required effort. So I stopped playing the game he expected me to play. I leaned forward slightly and I asked him about the people who had left. Not by name. I knew better than that. I asked him what he believed, drove someone to walk away from something they had devoted their entire life to. A carefully constructed question, neutral on the surface. Underneath it, a scalpel. The smile stayed, but for the first time, something stuttered, not in his words, in the machinery behind them. A half-beat delay so small that anyone else in that room would have missed it entirely. I didn't miss it. I had spent 7 years learning to hear exactly that sound. The sound of a carefully constructed answer arriving a fraction of a second too late. I didn't let him finish. I asked him about loyalty, about what it costs, about whether he believed a man could ever truly know who he was outside of the structures that built him. The smile cracked at the edges, not visibly. Not in any way a camera would catch, but I was close enough to see what lived underneath the surface of that expression, and for one terrible fraction of a second, something looked back at me that had no interest in being charming, no interest in being liked, no interest in any of the things the smile existed to communicate. It was the look of something that had been interrupted mid-performance and did not appreciate the interruption. And in that moment, I understood the architecture of the whole thing. The smile wasn't confidence. The smile was armor. The charm wasn't personality. It was infrastructure. Everything the world had ever seen of this man, every interview, every red carpet, every carefully managed moment of apparent humanity was load-bearing. It held something up. And the thing it held up could not be challenged and keep the facade intact at the same time. Those two things could not exist simultaneously. I had found the weakness, and whatever was sitting across from me in that chair, whatever was operating that smile, wearing that face, performing that laugh, it knew that I had found it. Devin hadn't moved in 20 minutes. I didn't look back at him. I kept my eyes exactly where they were, and I asked the next question. I had one question left. I had been saving it the entire interview. Everything before it had been preparation. The easy questions, the ones that cracked the edges of the smile and let me see what lived underneath. The ones that made the machinery stutter. This one was going to cut straight to the bone. I asked him about Scientology's internal justice system. Not gently, not buried inside something softer. I asked him directly, what happens to the people inside the organization who ask the wrong questions, who start pulling threads they were told to leave alone, who decide that the answers they were given aren't good enough anymore? The smile stayed, but something behind it leaned forward. He said the word like it was something he enjoyed the taste of, ethics. He said it the way a man describes something he loves, something he returns to, something that gives him genuine pleasure. He said that ethics wasn't punishment. It was correction. It was care. It was the organization's way of loving someone back into alignment. He said there was nothing more satisfying than watching someone who had lost their way find it again through the process. His voice had dropped into something almost tender, almost romantic. The way someone speaks about a thing they have done many times and look forward to doing again. And then his eyes moved to me. He said quietly, with the smile still perfectly in place, that if I kept asking questions like that one, he might have to show me personally what the ethics process looked like. Then he laughed. I have heard a lot of laughs in my life, genuine ones, performed ones, nervous ones. The laugh of a man trying to convince you he's joking when he isn't. This was none of those things. This laugh came from somewhere that had nothing to do with humor. It filled the room completely and then stopped, cut off at a precise point, like a sound effect someone had switched off at the source. Devin didn't move behind the camera. I didn't move either. He stood first, straightened his jacket, extended his hand across the space between us with the same choreographed ease as when he had entered the room. I stood and took it, the same nothing I had felt at the beginning, the same absence where warmth should have been. He held the shake one beat longer than necessary. Then he reached into his inside jacket pocket and produced a small card, cream-colored, embossed. He pressed it into my palm with 2 fingers and held it there for a moment before releasing it. He said, and the smile was enormous now, full and blinding and completely empty, "If you really want to understand what the ethics are, call me, anytime." Then he turned and walked out of the room, and the door closed behind him without a sound. Devin packed the equipment without speaking. I watched him work and said nothing. We carried everything to the car and pulled out of the estate and back down that narrow road through the trees, and neither of us said a single word for 20 minutes. I looked over at him somewhere on the highway. His eyes were on the road. His face was completely flat, not calm, flat, like something had been smoothed out of it that I hadn't noticed leaving. I told him we had gold. I told him this was the one. I told him we needed to move fast and get everything logged before we did anything else. He nodded once. That was the last thing Devin Reyes ever communicated to me. I called him the next morning. No answer. The morning after that. And the one after that. On the 5th day, I went to his apartment. The building manager let me in. The apartment was immaculate, not lived in clean, abandoned clean. Weeks of undisturbed silence sitting in every corner. His equipment was gone, his drives, his backup cards, every piece of footage from every job we had ever worked together. Gone. The shared cloud folder we used for raw files was empty, not deleted, empty. As if nothing had ever existed inside it. I stood in the middle of his apartment for a long time. And then I saw it on the kitchen counter, sitting perfectly centered, alone in the middle of an otherwise completely empty surface. The card, cream-colored, embossed. The Scientology card he had handed me in that room, sitting on Devin's counter in an apartment that showed no sign of Devin having been there in weeks. I had never given it to him. I had never shown it to anyone. I left the apartment and I have not gone back. If this story reached you, share it, like it, leave a comment, because the only thing they cannot erase is how many people already know. And if you take nothing else from what I've just told you, never trust a smile that never gets tired. Never trust a laugh that has nothing behind it. And never, never accept a card from a man who already knows where you live. Some things are better left unseen.